steal her paperwork.
Okay.
Dustin, would you start us off with prayer in a second? All right.
Just the quality so bad, so they cut it in now.
And let's start with a word of prayer, Dustin. Most of chapter 12 and all of chapter 13 to get through. So we're going to march through this pretty quickly. As we study these things. So Hebrews chapter 12, we finished up last time around verse 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. So let me just quickly, we'll kind of lay a little bit of groundwork here. Of course, in chapter 11, you have all of the hall of faith that we call it, where he goes back through several of the Old Testament stories, several from before the law of Moses, several from the era of the law of Moses, and shows how the people of old, as he calls them, lived by a faith that was active, that obeyed God's word, that all of which, all of those people knew at least a little bit about the fact that something better was coming, and that was part of their motivation for following God, is that God had something in store for them, and they didn't know all there was to know about it. They didn't know nearly as much as we know now. On this side of Jesus, but they all knew that something better was coming and had some measure of the gospel, right? It talks about how they had leaving them to leave that race behind and instead look at the race that is before them, which is a life of Christ and the blessings that we have in Him. So then verse 2, continuing that sentence, he said, wants them to look unto Jesus, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Some of you may have pioneer and perfecter. What else do you have there in verse 2 where with that phrase about Jesus?
Have author.
Author. Anyone have anything else there?
It footnotes it or leader.
Leader. If you remember, there was this same phrase is used earlier in the book of Hebrews that we looked at. Could be 4 or 5, chapter 4 or 5. And I think we looked at some translations that said captain. And so those are the ideas that are behind the original language that's used there. But all of those are shades of the idea that was, especially if it was unjust, that someone was somehow you'd been shamed for something that you actually didn't do, or that it was characterized in a way that wasn't accurate. Then those emotions may really kind of taken over your life for a little bit. Jesus was put on a cross for being for being perfect and for being right and for being the Son of God. If he had let his emotions about this shameful thing that was being done to him take over, then he wouldn't have been in the presence of mind to stay focused on his mission. So I think part of the idea here of him despising the shame, it's kind of an interesting turn of phrase, is that he treated that shame like, I don't care about that. I don't care about the shame. The shame doesn't matter to me. And it's the same attitude that we should have, right, about being a Christian. There will be those who, less so maybe in our part of the world, but still present out there, who will look at if we make decisions that are where we stand on moral ground, we live our life in a way that's different maybe than others in our family or
slaves, the worst, and they were up there just so people could say, "Oh, I don't want that to happen to me."
yeah. Yeah, the other two that were up there with him, and even his spot, which was originally reserved for Barabbas, right? Those were criminals. I think we I guess preacher come we would spend a sermon or two talking about Barabbas. Do I have the right name? I'm questioning my memory. Is that the right name? That Barabbas was the one they let go? Yeah. Okay. And that he was very possibly a leader of a rebellion against the Roman government, and so that's who they were trying to shame, and instead the people said, "No, put Jesus up there instead." Pretty incredible. And yes, there are lots of other cultures besides American culture that we're so familiar with, where shame and saving face is a much bigger part of your everyday life than we have. Some of you may have had experience in your life with some other cultures
well, especially just who they were. They were supposed to be the leaders of his people, right? His special people. They're supposed to be the ones who took care of them. But when you look at the prophets, just how many times they condemned the shepherds for devouring the flock instead of caring for them. These are the ones. It's not just some fool off the street. It's the supposed leaders and elite of his people who were mocking him. We should have known the law, but they're the ones making fun of him too.
They're the ones that put it in the row.
Yeah.
And beat him. Yeah. And those, exactly, those were the ones, those were supposed to be his people. That was a great point. Results of his second focus would be, and he certainly wants us to keep that in mind too, that he wants us to know what the end of our staying focused will be. And that's, of course, talking about the reward that's quite a bit.
Endure shame. We need to endure the same kind of shame and not bring shame on him.
Exactly. Yes. And if we stay focused on him and let our actions be guided by his life, his death, his resurrection, if we keep that in mind and let that guide us in our everyday lives with even simple things and how we go about our lives, but especially big things, how we treat others, how we all lead others, whether we're in a leadership position, or if we keep him in our mind, that will help us not become weary and discouraged. Verse 4, you have not yet resisted the bloodshed, striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation, which speaks to you as the Son. So now he's getting on to them a little bit. And then he calls up this proverb. It says, my son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. And in just a second, we'll read quickly through this next section here, but he introduces it here with some words of exhortation. He tells them they've forgotten something that they need to remember, and he tells them that they need to continue resisting, striving against sin. But he this whole book is really a rebuke of the audience, that they are doing something that he wants them to not do, which is trying to keep hold of the old, but he, for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So once again, God here uses something here on earth, a physical relationship, to help teach us about who He is and the relationship that He wants with us, as we've seen all through the book of Hebrews. He uses the relationship of a father and a son. And the fact that any father who loves his son is going to get on him. When he steps out of line, it's going to teach him in ways that correct his behavior, and does that because he loves him. And so he calls to mind that. So every person that would be hearing that, having 75% of the hours that you ever will spend with them. So your job's almost done at that point. But here, he reminds his audience that God does it for our profit. That's God's goal with that. Is that we're good. Is that we gain from that. He knows what's best for us, and He chastens us in a way that works out for the best for us. He wants us to become partakers of His holiness. Well, earthly fathers can't say that, but our God can, and He can chasten us, as we see here in this book. He can chasten us and work on us and mold us so that it works out where we are able to become partakers of His holiness, which is an incredible thing. That can even be said. And then he makes a good point that chastening is never joyful in the present, but it's painful. But afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. I think we would all do well to adopt the idea that bring me critical
to be healed. Pursue peace with all men, and sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. That there be no immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought for it with tears.
All right. So, some encouragement there to remain strong and to do things to strengthen ourselves. Just got done talking about being disciplined by God, and that will do the job that He then encourages. then he goes on to make a couple of specific applications in their relationships with all people. He wants them to pursue peace and holiness. He wants them to pursue the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. In other words, work with others to grow in the Lord. And in doing so, he continues that thought in verse 15. 16, how does your translation put that?
Immoral.
Immoral. My footnote says godless. Who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. The idea here is one that I keep seeing as I study my Bible, just absolutely throughout, is that God puts things in certain order. He is he's a God of order. Everything makes sense. It all fits together. And it's up to us to learn God's priority lists, to get to know Him and how He sees things and how He organizes things for us, how He put them together, what's important to Him, what's more important, what's important to God, but then less important than other things. So that when we face things in life and we can make decisions that are based on God's way of seeing things and not our way of seeing things. Sometimes we get important things even out of order, right? Well, here he talks about Esau treating his birthright as though it was worth a morsel of food. A morsel of food is good. We need that to live, right? But his birthright, he treated it as though those two things were equal, and they are not. So Esau was not operating with God's priorities in mind. He wasn't thinking straight about his life, and as a result, things did not go well for him. So cautionary tale. All right, verse 18 through 21. Okay, this is the story of the Israelites, of them coming out of Egypt and then being at the foot of that mountain there about 45, 50 days later. And that's where God was giving the law. Remember, they weren't allowed to touch that mountain. There was the earth was shaking because that's where God was on that mountain with Moses. It was absolutely terrifying, absolutely terrifying for those people. They didn't, and that's what we're going to read about here. But then remember that whole story, the whole story of them coming out of Egypt and going to that mountain and getting the law of Moses is repeated with Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and then 50 days later, the apostles getting power from on high, right? Just like on the mountain, power from on high on the day of Pentecost, and then them preaching the new law, the new word, the new covenant. And while there are many things about those two situations that are very similar, God does rhyme, but it's not an exact repeat. And the new covenant is way better. So he's going to contrast to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. Beautiful contrast between these two mountains. One that was terrifying and that was related to the old covenant and that didn't provide forgiveness of sins, and then the new one that we get to come to that is just talking about all these little phrases here about the Mount Zion that we get to come to is so encouraging. It talks about how there's an innumerable company of angels that are associated with it. It talks about how the General Assembly and Church of the Firstborn, which we're all members of, registered in heaven. And if you haven't thought about that in a while, don't forget that your name is registered in heaven. That's a powerful thing to keep in mind.
Not big, but yeah, I think some might take that a little far, perhaps.
To Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that. We spent some time with that. We've already looked at that last verse there when we looked at Abel in chapter 11. We kind of skipped ahead and looked at that to be ready for this little section. But just a reminder there that Abel's blood has been speaking since it was first shed. It spoke to God on that day when he talked to Cain about killing him. That's the wording that's used in Genesis chapter 4, and then of course it spoke in chapter 11. Jesus even used the blood of Abel as an example to speak to the scribes and Pharisees, and then here it's mentioned again in verse 24. So Jesus' blood speaks better things. All right. Thoughts through that section?
Things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire.
All right. So, whole book of Hebrews, written to encourage his immediate audience to leave behind completely Judaism, focused completely on their Christian life, following Jesus. Here he's once again hitting those points shaken. So that would be the kingdom is mentioned, but that would include our souls and our spiritual existence. We will go on after this, but all the things. All right, any more thoughts on chapter 12 before we move on to 13?
Like the contrast between the power that was evident in the Old Testament and all that God was able to do, and yet he did not do until the blood of Christ.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, it's clear that he had this plan, and that he, in a very measured and intentional way, played it out so that all of the pieces would be in place at just the right time. And Hebrews is a great place to go to kind of get all some of these pieces and see kind of the big picture. I'm teaching this same book to the teenager class next quarter, starting next Sunday, and I think that's going to be kind of my focus with them is let's treat this as an opportunity to get the big picture on the whole story from the beginning of time to the end of time, because it's all mentioned in Hebrews. It's all throughout there, and he goes through things in such a methodical way that you can kind of keep relating it back to the big picture, and saying that, yeah. Yeah, and then certainly this chapter 12, there's several mentions of God.
Among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. For fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. Let your character be free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. So that we confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What shall man do to me?
Oh, yeah. Then verse 6, that's a great one that's another one of those great ones that's good to put on a note card and get that one memorized and written on your heart. In some good ways. It's applicable in many situations in life. So, here at the end of the book of Hebrews, there are passages that sort of sound more like some of the other epistles, where it's just going through different topics and giving encouragement. The benefit in Hebrews is that he gets to build these encouragements on the backdrop of everything we just talked about with them already. But here's is kind of one of those passages where he's encouraging them in ways that you might find in any of the epistles. Brother, we love to continue to mention money. I think the original language is covetousness, which of course is a little broader than that. But it's the same concept, so that's not off at all. reason is because God's never going to leave us or forsake us. So we should just continue focusing on Him. All right, and then verses 7 through 9, he wants us to think about the source of teaching. Somebody read 7 through 9.
Remember those who led you, who spoke the word of God to you, and considering the result of their way of life, imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Do not be misled by varied and strange teachings, for it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by foods, through which those who were so occupied were not benefited.
Yeah, so it's just a great reminder. So it kind of covers a couple of things here, but all sorts of whose lives change at some point, and they don't benefit from the things that they learned earlier, and those who certainly wouldn't want to follow. Excuse me. But then in verse 8, a verse that can easily be taken out of this context and used in lots of different ways. Here specifically talking about the things that we're taught, but identifying that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. A reminder that great teacher never changes, and that the outcome of his life, the outcome of his conduct was our salvation. So certainly keeping that more so in our mind than even those who we learn from here on earth. But then he also talks in verse 9 about not being carried about by, for lack of a better term, crazy ideas. So in other words, test all, think about all those other verses that talk about similar things, and test all things. Look at the result of what you're
have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So let us go out to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. Here we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come.
all right. So he just got through talking about considering those who have taught them, which would have, to this audience, would have brought to mind priests whose job was to teach the people. Though under the Christian dispensation, that would have been much different, but that same idea would have been there. And so then he starts talking about the altar. And so we don't have an altar in Christian churches, right? But here it says we do have an altar. So for the sin offering, for that particular Jewish part of the law of Moses, when they sacrificed an animal for the sin offering to get its blood, the entire animal was then taken outside of the camp and burned. It wasn't one of the animals that was able to be cooked and eaten by. So don't store up treasure for yourself here. He just mentioned covetousness. He's wanting them to continue considering Jesus. And you know, for this particular audience, especially the immediate audience of this book, part of the reason they were wanting to go back to Judaism may have been family and friends that they had that were back there that were just considering them shameful for taking on this, for becoming a Christian. And so every person here may have some shame from that. If not from family and friends, then from their society. I mean, they were so persecuted back then for being a Christian. So these words would have especially been encouraging to them, and hopefully encouraging to them to stay with Jesus. Go out and bear that reproach, and take it on. And then verse 15, it says, therefore by him